Alright guys, what I want to do is going to go over your test 2 review. The other video went over chapter 4 and 5, so it focused in on the cell structure, it focused in on the plasma membrane, and it also focused in on enzymes. I know that it's labeled test number 2 majors, but your test has that same information on it. The only thing that was left out is the chapter on photosynthesis. So I do want to cover those slides really quickly in the review. All right, so taking a look at the chapter 6 kind of portion, there's a part there that I want you to know examples of photosynthetic organisms. This is also a question in your portfolio. Some examples, of course, are plants, which are in the kingdom Plantae. We also see algae in the kingdom Protista, both of which do photosynthesis. And the last one is Cyanobacteria. Now, this is a type of bacterium domain bacteria, but it also does the process of photosynthesis. This is going to be a multiple choice type question that might say all of the following are photosynthetic organisms except. Okay, so plants, algae, and cyanobacteria all do this. So if they threw something else in like a mushroom or a dolphin or some other kind of like animal, they don't do photosynthesis. So these are your examples. You also need to make sure that you understand the equation of photosynthesis. So it's listed here. If you'll notice, you have carbon dioxide plus water. Not only do you have to have those two things, you also need to have solar energy and the pigments. All of that working together can create the sugar, which is the CH2O, and the oxygen, which is the O2. Be aware as well, with this reaction, you need to know that definition of what reduction versus oxidation is. So if you notice on the bottom here, you'll see that the first stage is for oxidation. The water, H2O, gets split, giving up the hydrogens. When they give up hydrogens, remember that is oxidation. What's left is the oxygen. There is no hydrogens left there. Those hydrogens need to go somewhere, and this is the top part of the reaction where it gives the CO2, picks up the hydrogens to become the sugar. This is called reduction. Okay, so when they're accepting the hydrogens, we have reduction. So make sure you understand the difference between oxidation and reduction, and you can actually pick it out of an equation like one seen here. The next thing we need to look at are the light reaction and what kind of goes in, what comes out, the basic stuff that goes along with the light reaction. So with the light reaction, you need to know that this is the first stage of photosynthesis. It has to happen first. The things that go in, of course, there's water, there's light, that's why it's called the light reaction, but we also have ADP and NADP+. Okay, now ADP is eventually going to be made into ATP, and ADP is going to pick up those hydrogens we're going to break off the water. Okay, so these are things that go in. So what comes out of the first stage? Well, the water gets converted into oxygen. We now form ATP with energy from energizing those electrons, and NADP picks up the hydrogen, so now it's NADPH. We also see we need to know where this takes place. This takes place in the chloroplast, but specifically in those thylakoid membranes. Those thylakoids are where the pigments are located, and so this is why that takes place in the thylakoids, because they have to actually absorb the light. Also, it's important to know which wavelength of light, because remember light travels in waves, okay, that's important. What wavelengths of light does the plant use? Well, guys, it's going to use the visible light, white light, but remember white light can be split up into colors. When we look at these colors, the most used ones are the blues and purples and the reds and oranges. So in other words, guys, it's most of the colors except one. The least used is the green. The reason it's least used is because most plants, remember, they look green, which means they're reflecting the green light, not absorbing it. Okay, so white light is preferable from the plant, so it can pick these wavelengths, but it will use blue and purple and red and orange more often. Green, it will use the least. So this covers the first reaction or the light reaction that we're going to see. Let's look at step 2, which is the Calvin cycle. The Calvin cycle is the second stage to this process of photosynthesis. Now, remember in the Calvin cycle, though, there's going to be things that came from the light reaction that are going to be used here. That ATP energy, because it's a cycle, remember, so we have to turn it. Energy is going to be used, the ATP. Also, we're going to drop off those H's. So NADPH is going to drop off those hydrogens. Now, the Calvin cycle has 3 stages to it. The first stage, remember, is carbon dioxide fixation. Remember, carbon dioxide is a gas. It's really hard to hold on to. So because of that, we need to fix it in a form that the plant can hold on to. All right. The second stage is now that we have the carbon dioxide captive, we want to add hydrogens to it. This is where NADPH is going to drop them off. And we're going to add the hydrogens to the carbon dioxide to create that sugar. Now, in order to keep this cycle going, though, we need to regenerate the molecule who held on and fixed carbon dioxide. That molecule is RUBP. So we need to regenerate that in the last stage so that the cycle can continue. So what is the role of RUBP? Well, I just told you it binds. It holds on to the carbon dioxide during the first stage. So this is why it has to be reformed. It's like resetting the trap so you can catch more carbon dioxide. There's also a molecule that we saw that was called G3P. G3P, guys, is the end product of the Calvin cycle. It's what comes out of that photosynthesis. It's that molecule that we said could be used to make a lot of stuff like glucose, cellulose, starch, but it could also be a precursor for proteins and fatty acids, which are the building blocks of fats. So when we look at this, this is a very unique molecule that can be modified into whatever the plant needs at the time. Most likely the plant's going to utilize it as glucose. Now, with the Calvin cycle, there's things that have to go in and things that have to come out, just like we saw with the light reaction. So ATP goes in to turn the cycle. NADPH also goes in to hand off those hydrogens, because they're going to give them to the carbon dioxide and reduce the carbon dioxide. Okay, CO2 is the other molecule that goes in. So then what comes out? Well, we have the sugar. Okay, so when we see here, sugar is going to come out, which is a CH2O. ADP, because ADP is going to go back to the first cycle, the light reaction, and pick up more energy and be ATP. And NADP is also going to leave to go back to the light reaction to pick up more hydrogens. So guys, it is important to be able to compare and contrast the first stage and the second stage. This is going to end up being like one of those matching type questions. Like, is it happening in the first stage or is it happening in the second stage? All this information is really found previously in this even PowerPoint here. But you can see you have water here that's going to be oxidized into oxygen in the first stage. The first stage is also light dependent, which means it requires sunlight. And it's going to need to absorb solar energy to convert ATP and NADPH. Remember, this first stage also takes place in those thylakoid membranes. The second stage, which is the Calvin cycle, is going to take that carbon dioxide and it's going to convert it into a sugar. But it's going to need some help to do this. It's going to be driven by that ATP and that NADPH. That's where the hydrogens are going to come from. Remember, this is also light independent. It does not require light directly, so it can happen during the day or the night. Its main goal is to convert inorganic molecules, CO2, because there's no hydrogens yet, to organic molecules as CH2O. This is the food that it creates. All right. Remember that the second stage of the Calvin cycle takes place in the stroma, which is the liquid portion of the chloroplast, which is enzyme rich. The last thing I want you to make sure that you know is that you know the structure of a chloroplast. There will be a chloroplast on the test and you're going to need to be able to label it. In this particular picture, guys, I'm reviewing as well the light reaction versus the Calvin cycle. It tells you what goes in and what's going to come out. So in the light reaction, you see you have water going in. In the Calvin cycle, you have carbon dioxide. Remember that the light reaction is going to take place on the thylakoids. That's the one poker chip. But when you have a stack of them, like you see here, you're going to see that those are called grana. On the other hand, the Calvin cycle is going to take place in the fluid, which is called the stroma. Please be able to label this. All right, it should be an easy couple of points that you can get by labeling the chloroplast. Also remember, in the light reaction, water goes in, however, oxygen comes out. This is the first stage. Carbon dioxide goes in the Calvin cycle and sugar is going to come out. Guys, this represents that equation for photosynthesis. Water plus carbon dioxide along with pigments and light can convert this into oxygen and sugar, the two things that come out. So I know this is a brief overview of what we're looking at for photosynthesis, but I wanted you to be able to view these videos and kind of get a good sense of what's going to be covered on your exam. We will review some of this stuff in class and just make sure that we're understanding it, but these you can view on your own time over as many times as you want. But make sure you are viewing both videos. I'm sorry that they're in 2 videos this time, but that's how that's the time I had, and I already had the first one done from semesters ago. And this one now will be done for you as well. So please utilize these as study tools as you work through your review, and you can also use them to help you work through your portfolio. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. And again, have a great weekend and study hard.